Oh my goodness. There is something reassuring and comforting when the Detroit Lions suck. And it's not because they're an NFC North rival of the Bears. It's not anything like that. But it's more about the fact of this always goes better for me. This is always more fun for you guys too, frankly, when I have some punching bags. Like for years, the skid marks, the Cleveland Browns were my punching bag. You don't get to be my punching bag as much anymore. It's not as fun. The Jags were kind of a punching bag. We'll see if they still remain the punching bag. The Cowboys can be a punching bag at times, but everybody can punch and unload on them because they're the Chicago Bears of Texas with less success over the past 2+ decades. And that's a reality that Cowboys fans don't like. They want to talk about, hey, remember the 90s, remember the Landry days. So basically you're talking about shit that happened 2 or 3 decades ago. Gee, sounds like a fucking Bears fan. Welcome to the club, buddy. And then, of course, there's the Chicago Bears, and they are a cornucopia of reasons to be a punching bag. But the Lions, they're steady and relatively consistent, and I appreciate that. And you're certainly talking about a team that underwent some big changes this offseason, actually started the changes during the 2020 season. They were needed. You make a bad decision, 'tis better to own up to that bad decision quickly and course correct and move on. The Lions kind of stubbornly stood their ground, which is why Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn were even allowed to return in 2020, although after 2 years you would have thought, well, we've seen fucking enough of this. Apparently they had. Nonetheless, here we are. So the Detroit Lions going into this offseason, we're looking for a new general manager and a new head coach. They brought in Brad Holmes, who had years of experience working in the Los Angeles Rams organization, in their scouting department, in their front office. And then in comes head coach Dan Campbell, who delivered one of the more memorable introductory press conferences we've seen in a long time. If I was to compare that press conference to anything that I've experienced in terms of like initial coach interviews or coach press conferences, I remember when the Bears, laid an egg in their pursuit of Nick Saban after the 2003 season. And the competition then pivoted to Lovie Smith and Russ Grimm. And I remember Russ Grimm sitting there and saying, when asked about his coaching philosophy or his team philosophy, by God, we're going to run the ball, we're going to pass the ball, and we're going to win football games. There's something so dumb, so simplistic, and so magnificent about an answer like that. Anyways, so there's new leadership again in Detroit, and it will be very fascinating to see if the results are any different than they have been in the past. Obviously, there are other big changes to the organization, most notably the fact the guy that's been the franchise quarterback for the previous 12 seasons, and Matthew Stafford, was dealt away to the Los Angeles Rams, yielded you a bit of a bounty of draft picks, notably future first-round draft picks, also brought Jared Goff back in return. So he's got some time here, a year or two, to potentially show whether or not he could be the guy for the Detroit Lions. But certainly a big, sizable, notable change. This organization had been so heavily dependent upon Matthew Stafford and his skills and talents for over a decade. He was the face of the franchise, and now he's not there anymore. So no matter what, certainly a much different, newer look Detroit Lions team this year. And that's not all. Gone are other guys like Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, Matthew Prater, Jared Davis, Jamal Agnew, Kerryon Johnson. Like, especially when you look at the receiving core, you say to yourself, okay, you bring in Jared Goff from a situation where he had guys like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. He had some talent to throw to. Now you're bringing him in knowing that he needs talent to throw to, and it basically seems like you're letting all the talent leave. That's interesting, to say the least, potentially questionable. They did sign some guys in the free agent period. You had Jamal Williams, Tyrell Williams, Alex Anzalone, Randy Bullock. So some moves were made. This is a weird thing where the Lions are a bad team. They sucked, and they didn't have a ton of cap space. So really weird, kind of interesting dynamic there. So obviously with a new GM, a new head coach, you look to the NFL draft and see what they do. We'll find out what the results are going to be. They drafted Penei Sewell, 7th overall, the offensive tackle from Oregon. They're going to try and play him on the right side as the bookend to Taylor Decker on the left side. And I'll say this, like if he could become a high-level right tackle for the next decade, this pick is pretty good. What the Detroit Lions better hope is that a Justin Fields or a Mac Jones doesn't become that dude for their respective organizations. Otherwise, it makes the Lions look like an absolute clown show and means Holmes and Campbell should be fired immediately. You better also hope that some of the other offensive linemen drafted in this first round don't pan out to be as good or better than Sewell, because they will also be looking really, really bad. On Wuzurike, we'll see after him opting out in 2020, like what he's going to be able to bring right away. Alim McNeil, you could clearly tell there was an intention there to get better in the trenches, to get more physical in the trenches, which is matching the mindset of head coach Dan Campbell. And I at least credit that. At least draft to match the philosophy of what you want to do. Find talent that's going to fit what you want to do. You can customize your system around the talent that you have. That makes sense. I like some of the guys that got a little bit later, too, in Melon Falmu. You know, certainly a guy with athletic upside that is much better than his draft position. Same thing to me with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Excited about what he could potentially do. Might be a low-end fantasy play for folks. Talk about a fourth-round receiver. He's going to get some opportunities there in Detroit. And looking at this roster and kind of how they're constructed this year, you know, some of the biggest strengths to me, first and foremost, the best thing of all, they got the stank of Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn the hell out of the organization. That's got to have a cleansing feeling. That's got to have a cleansing impact. How much does that matter? Remains to be determined. But that is clearly a situation of addition by subtraction. Absolutely. And for everything that you heard about Matt Patricia and how he rubbed people the wrong way, how he rubbed players the wrong way, you hear good things about Dan Campbell, about his leadership and that, you know, players want to walk through walls for him. Like that's good shit. Like that represents a significant, sizable cultural change in the NFL for a team when you go from this to that. And that culture thing can matter. When you get players bought in, because the talent difference between the best players in the league and the worst players in the league is not as great as we sometimes like to make it out. There's a difference, but it's not so great that things like culture, chemistry, camaraderie, teamwork don't matter. They matter a great deal. They absolutely do. You can also look at this line and say that they've been heavily invested in via the draft. Other first-round picks in the past, like Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow. You've invested other, like, second, third-round picks on guys like Jackson at guard. Maybe Wyatt Davis at some point also gets a chance to start at guard. You spent the first-round pick on Sewell. You bring in Jared Goff. You know he's not going to create a bunch of plays with his feet. You know that he has to be well protected, like he was at times for the Rams. As a result, you've now constructed what feels like it could be a strength of your team in the offensive line. It gives you some physicality, gives you an identity on offense, but will also protect your quarterback. And there's also a piece to me, this is going to sound weird, but that they could be overlooked and disrespected, and could they potentially leverage that? You know, sometimes in the NFL, it's not always about being the best. It's not always about having the most talent. Sometimes you just be lucky. You face teams at the right time. You have a situation where you're kind of sandwiched in. You're that overlooked game. You're that trap game. And sometimes that can matter. The Lions could come in and players and coaches on other teams may not prepare as hard. They might not prepare as well. They might take them a little bit for granted, and the Lions could jump up and surprise some people. They absolutely can. It's possible. I know I'm reaching here, but it's possible. But you got a lot of question marks on this team. I look at the performance of recent high draft picks and what you're going to get out of them this year. You go back to 2019, the first and second round picks, Hockenson and Tavai. They really need Hockenson to be that George Kittle type of tight end that he was supposed to be when you drafted him with the 8th overall pick in 2019. You look at that 2020 draft with Jeffrey Okudah and DeAndre Swift and Okwara. Like, these are guys that you need to play to their draft level or higher. You need Okudah to be a stud, and he sucked last year, just like that Lions defense as a whole sucked last year. When you have this type of significant questions about the high prominent picks of the past couple of years, that is not a good thing and not necessarily a harbinger of future success. And what is Jared Goff going to be now that he's away from Sean McVay? Could be a good thing for him. Could be a bad thing for him. Could be that Jared Goff is absolute cheeks, and the only thing that made him look respectable to good was Sean McVay. It could be that Sean McVay was too exacting and too much of a perfectionist, and his system wasn't the best fit for Jared Goff. We're going to find out this year. Now that he's got a new place and he's got a new opportunity, he's the unquestioned starter. He's not going to have some of the problems of Sean McVay breathing down his neck or getting impatient with him. It could be a good thing for him. It could also expose him for what he really is. Can they run the ball consistently? Obviously, that's a question. Kerryon Johnson ended up being a massive bust. There's no AP. DeAndre Swift, you assume he and Jamal Williams are going to be the two dudes leading the backfield. There's some talent there, but what are you going to get out of it? Are they going to be able to consistently run the ball? Keep opposing defenses off balance? And will their defense put up any opposition whatsoever? I mean, just look at the talent level of this defense. It's mid to poor. Mostly poor. Where are the standouts? Where are the studs? Where are the franchise players, the difference makers? You draft a guy like Okudah, third overall. You're certainly hoping that he would be a difference maker, but he absolutely was not last year. Maybe he can be, but he gave no indication last year that he was going to be. They need a couple of guys to show that they are big-time players in order for this defense to put up any real type of opposition at all. As I was looking ahead to the season, though, and looking at the schedule, and I was saying, where are the realistic wins for a team that on paper does not look very good? And let's be clear, they absolutely do not look very good. They got questions in a lot of places, offensively, defensively. But when I started looking at the schedule, I'm like, week 1, hosting San Francisco, it's week 1. You never know what's going to happen there. It's a home game. You've got a new head coach, might be fired up, new quarterback, new feeling organization. Possible win. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying looking for possible wins. Because it would be easy right now, the way this team looks on paper, Dan Campbell's introductory press conference, some of the other things you heard, to laugh at these guys and say they're a 2 or 3 win team and they'll be battling it out for the number 1 pick. And that might be what happens. But that might not be what happens. Because if they were able to win 3 or 4 games with Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn, if Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are any level of upgrade at all, and I would expect them to at least be a marginally better upgrade at a minimum, this team should be better. Week 6, hosting Cincinnati. Week 8, hosting Philadelphia. Week 10, at Pittsburgh, because we always know with the Steelers, especially when it's a home game, if they're taking on a bad team, it spells problems and potential disaster for them year in and year out. Week 12, you've got the Bears. Now, the Bears might be starting Justin Fields at that point in time, but still. At some point in time, it's going to level out a little bit. And, by then, the Lions could be in a good rhythm and have started to figure some things out. Week 14, they go to Denver. Week 16, at Atlanta. I don't think we look at those teams and expect them to be world beaters. And even week 18, final week of the season, still doesn't it feel weird to say week 18 instead of week 17 and talk about 17-game seasons versus 16? Still don't know how I feel about that. It's an adjustment. Even that week 18 game against Green Bay, let's say Green Bay has the division sewed up and their playoff positions sewn up already. The Lions could go in there and sneak out a win at home against the Packers to close out the season. So I look at it and I was thinking, realistically, how many potential possible wins could there be for this Lions team? You could argue 7 to 8. That's not me saying they're going to win 7 or 8 games. Let's not be crazy, because Lions gonna Lions. I think they're more of a 5-win team. Maybe things go poorly, a 4-win team. But I think this team's going to be a little better than they were last year. I think they're going to be a little more competitive than they were last year. I envision with some increased toughness that Dan Campbell is trying to bring in and Brad Holmes is trying to bring in based off of what they did in terms of the draft and so forth. I would expect this team to be a little mentally tougher. This team to find ways to maybe win a couple of games that they would have lost in previous seasons. So as a result, and you look at last year's Lions team, as bad as they were, they still had a few games that they could have won, that they pissed down their legs. So it's not unreasonable to think this team could win 6 or 7 games. It's not unrealistic to think that, hey, if they get some momentum early on in the year and beat a team or two you don't think they could, they might go on and be the second best team in this division. I'm going to play it safe and say they're going to be the worst team in the division and win 5 games. I'm not going to totally shit on the Lions. I do expect them to be an improved team this year and be one that you might, not want to totally ignore because they can jump up and bite you.